Healing didn't change her, it brought her back. I say that now, but it took me a long time to understand what that meant. For years, I treated healing like a to-do list. Fix the thing that's broken, patch the flaw, become the better version people expected. If I had a problem, an anxious afternoon, a fight I'd had with my sister, a string of sleepless nights, I'd look for the right solution. A book, a workshop, a quick life hack someone recommended. I collected fixes the way other people collected recipes. Each new method promised a clearer me, a more polished, more acceptable version of myself. My name is Claire. I'm 42. I work in a small gallery downtown where I spend my days hanging light, judging prints, talking to artists, and sometimes, if I'm lucky, stepping outside to watch the street. My life looks tidy enough: an apartment with borrowed sunlight, a Saturday morning yoga class I sometimes attend, friends who check in when they can. From the outside, it might have looked like I had a handle on things. Inside, though, I had a list of parts I thought needed fixing. I wanted to be less anxious. I wanted to be forgiving without effort. I wanted to be more present when people spoke to me, less quick to bristle when a casual comment felt like a judgment. It felt like each of these things was a flaw, a small construction site where I needed to stand with a tool belt and start work. So, I worked. I read the books. I followed the podcasts. I tried breathing exercises, cold showers, gratitude journaling, digital fasting. I changed my morning routine twice, then 3 times. I replaced one therapist with another. I took a week-long silent retreat where I was supposed to return a new person who didn't think in loops. I ticked boxes. I told myself I was improving, but something odd happened. The more I chased the fixed version of myself, the less I recognized the person I already was. I started to feel like an exhibit I was editing, polishing away edges that made me, me. The anxious afternoons didn't vanish so much as migrate, wearing a different outfit. The jokes that once felt natural came out measured. I worried, quietly, that in the pursuit of improvement I was erasing parts that had value, parts that had kept me whole. There was an evening that marked a shift, though it didn't feel like a shift at the time. It was late spring. The gallery was empty, and I had one poster to hang for a small show opening next week. I put my ladder against the wall, drilled 3 small holes, and stepped back to admire the alignment. The poster was straight. The screws were tight. The job was done. I stood there for a beat, not a moment of triumph, but a quiet note of completion. And then I realized I hadn't thought once about whether I was fixed. I hadn't thought about whether I should optimize myself first. I hadn't rehearsed how I would respond to some theoretical criticism, or checked whether my anxiety had reduced by 10%. I had simply done the work with my hands and enjoyed the symmetry of the poster against a clean wall. That small enjoyment surprised me. It was so ordinary, so unremarkable, and yet it felt like a homecoming. For the first time in a long while, I felt present to the thing at hand, not to the ongoing project of self-improvement. After that evening, I started to lean into the ordinary moments with less agenda. I began to notice the way light sat on the gallery floor in the late afternoon, the sound a delivery truck made as it rolled by, the exact shade a new print took on when the sun caught it. I started to cook for myself because the act of chopping and stirring felt good, not because some blogger had told me it would reduce stress. I answered a friend's call and let our conversation be messy and ordinary and not a test of my progress. Healing, I learned, did not arrive as a single sweeping cure. It arrived in a different register as small clarities, as permission to be myself rather than an improved copy of myself. It wasn't that I stopped wanting to grow, it's that I stopped measuring growth by an external checklist. I stopped believing the narrative that I was a project in need of constant adjustment, There was a morning when this realization tightened into something I could name. I'd been invited to a panel about the local arts scene. I had said yes out of habit because people asked, and I was known for being dependable. The week before the panel, I felt the old itch. Prepare more, rehearse answers, smooth out rough edges. I sat with my notebook and started a list of things to say that would make me sound decisive and unflappable. The night before, I woke at 2 in the morning and my mind began to rehearse everything I might be criticized for. The rehearsal had a pattern I knew well. Imagine failure, preempt it, armor up. I felt the adrenaline tighten in my throat, the breath become shallow. Instead of jumping into a new fix, a breathing video, a late-night essay on stage presence, I did something I rarely allowed myself. I paused. I made tea. I sat on the small balcony and watched nothing in particular. I let the anxiety exist as one thing among many. The damp air, a neighbor's laugh, the hum of the refrigerator. There was no performance in the pause. No boxes to tick, just breath. The panel went fine. Not because I had performed flawlessly. I stumbled on a question and laughed at myself, and the room smiled back. What struck me was how different it felt to engage from a place of rest. I wasn't trying to be a corrected version of myself. I was simply showing up. People responded to that not because it was impressive, but because it was human. The change wasn't dramatic. Friends still saw growth as a work in progress and asked me which new habit I'd adopted. I told them the truth. I was learning to hold my life like something fragile and precious rather than like a sculpture to be perfected. I cared for my edges instead of sanding them down. Healing, as I began to see, is more sibling to discovery than to renovation. It is learning the contours of your own interior, recognizing where things have been dented by life and where they have been shaped by choice. It is accepting that some dents hold memory and that smoothing them away might make you unmoored. It is gentleness toward the parts that still ache. It is curiosity about why they ache and what they ask. Once I stopped treating myself as a project, other things shifted. I was kinder to myself when I made mistakes. I let a friend carry a small burden without feeling like I had failed. I forgave myself for days I spent doing little more than breathing. I returned to the practices that truly sustained me. Long walks, quiet mornings with a book not because they were efficient, but because they fit. There is a common misconception that healing is a transformation that makes you unrecognizable. People think you emerge sharper, brighter, somehow improved in the way a retouched photo looks better. For me, healing did not change who I was. It brought me back to who I had always been. Someone with limits, with tenderness, with an appetite for beauty, and a capacity for small acts of care. Now, when I find myself reaching for the quick fix, I try to ask a different question. Am I trying to change to please someone else? Or am I trying to return to myself? That question doesn't always have a tidy answer. Sometimes I choose the workshop. Sometimes I choose the quiet. The point is less the choice than the return. The ongoing practice of making myself recognizable again and again. The other week, I stood under a new print we were hanging, and a student came in, nervous and earnest, asking if he could apprentice for an afternoon. I agreed, and for the next few hours, he watched me measure, level, and adjust. He asked why I worked so carefully. I told him, truthfully, that it reminded me to slow down, that tending to small things keeps me attentive to larger ones. He nodded like it made sense and then bent to help. Healing, I thought as we worked, is not about becoming flawless. It is about learning how to show up for yourself in a way that feels true. It is about returning to the parts of yourself that were waiting, quiet and patient, for you to come home.